All right, so first I wanted to go to Romans chapter 1, verses 21 through 25. It says, "For even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible man, and of birds and four-footed animals and crawling creatures. Therefore God gave them over in the lusts of their hearts to impurity, so that their bodies would be dishonored among them. For they exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and they worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen." Paul is talking to the Roman church, but he keeps mentioning they. It's not, and it's obvious that he's talking about somebody, but it's not really. He doesn't really define who they are. But I feel like generally, collectively, you could insert just humanity as a whole in this verse. We as a race did this. We exchanged the glory of God for an image in the form of corruptible man and birds and four-footed animals and crawling creatures. When we were, we took a vacation to England earlier in the year, and one of the cool things we got to do was go to the British Museum, which is pretty epic as museums go. One of the things that's kind of almost like overwhelming as you're walking through it is like exhibit after exhibit after exhibit of different cultures over thousands and thousands of years that have each carved out their niche in like human history of like what their culture was all about and everything that defined what their culture was. And one common thread is that you could see in every single exhibit is that humans worship. Humans find a way to worship. It's like who we are. No matter where people were at, no matter what part of the globe they lived in, humans will worship something or someone, right? And to me, it's kind of like thinking of, I know I use Fritzy as an example a lot. He's kind of like a multi-purpose like object lesson in like 8-pound form. He's so cute and fuzzy, and he barks a lot, and that's kind of like one of the big. We've trained him out of pretty much everything else that was like a negative in Fritzy's life, but Fritzy's still not all the time. But when Fritzy's excited, he barks, and you can say, well, that's normal for a dog. Dogs bark. Well, yes, dogs bark. Fritzy barks a lot. I've been around a lot of dogs, and Fritzy, when he gets excited, he just like starts yapping. And I think what it is if you study like the history of Pomeranians, they were bred down in Germany. That's where they got the name Pomeranian. It's Pomerania's region in Germany that they were bred down to the minute size that they are now. But their ancestors, before they were bred down, were these sled dogs from Iceland. Okay, so that's why they've got these big fluffy coats, is because centuries, maybe millennia prior to that, they were bred as sled dogs that could handle snow. So Fritzy, he loves snow. He also loves to bark, and more than any other dog. And I think what it is like when they get excited, when you have dogs that are sled dogs, I think when they're easily excited and he starts taking off and running, if one barks and the others start barking, and it's like this mutual collective excitement that kind of builds this team thing. I can't prove it. I think it's in his DNA. I think his little sled dog brain is just yapping away every time. If we throw the ball or something, he's just like, and just like tears off after it. I've seen other dogs that were just like quiet while they did that, but Fritzy just like barks. So anyway, what I'm getting at is there's certain things that when you look at any given animal, like that's part of their DNA, okay? And I'm gonna submit to you that humans, it's in our DNA to worship. Like even if we would presume to deny the existence of a higher power, we still worship something. I have coworkers who, I have one that I'm thinking of right now, who he would call himself an atheist, but this guy, eats, drinks, sleeps, like his whole life is about fitness. And like everything in his life, he's like a hardcore into like paleo diet, kind of like just eating everything, cutting out all sugar. And I'm like, that's great, that's cool. I'm kind of trying to head that way with what I'm eating, you know, but still, like, I'm hopefully never going to be as hardcore as this guy, because this guy, like, that's his life. That's all he thinks about when he's not doing work or doing whatever else he does through the day that he has to do. He's thinking about this goal of being this super buff guy that eats exactly what he thinks he ought to be putting in his body. And he does a pretty good job of it. But all I'm saying is you can look at his life and say, well, he doesn't have a God.
Yeah.
Everybody's got a God.
Right.
Everybody's got a God. And I'm just going to submit to you, like, it's part of who we are. If we can go to Jeremiah 10. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about the concept of idolatry in the Old Testament and why it is something that still, as a concept that still applies to us. We often think of it as foreign and having nothing to do with 21st century American culture, but I'm going to show you that the similarities far outweigh the dissimilarities between our culture and theirs when it comes to idolatry. Jeremiah 10, verse 1, Hear the word which the Lord speaks to you, O house of Israel. Thus says the Lord, do not learn the way of the nations, and do not be terrified by the signs of the heavens, although the nations are terrified by them. For the customs of the peoples are a delusion, because it is wood cut from a forest, the work of the hands of a craftsman with a cutting tool. They decorate it with silver and with gold. They fasten it with nails and with hammers so that it will not totter. Like a scarecrow in a cucumber field are they, and they cannot speak. They must be carried, because they cannot walk. Do not fear them, because they can do no harm, nor can they do any good. So the problem that I think we have as Americans when we read this verse is that we think, yeah, but that's them 3,000 years ago, whenever this was written. That's not us. We don't deal with that. Every time I read this passage, and it talks about they decorate it with silver and with gold, and they fasten it with nails and with hammers so that it won't totter. There's so many things. We'll get into this later in what I have, but there's so many aspects of things that we as Americans have a tendency to fall prey to in terms of idolatry, that we have a tendency to, I dare say, worship. The thing, what I'm getting at, that verse 4, they decorate it with silver and gold. They fasten it with nails and with hammers so that it won't totter. One thing that I want to point out about idols is if you make something an idol, it's there because you decided for it to be there. It's there because you made it an idol and you supported it and you did everything that you needed to do to make it that way. This verse, every time I read it, it makes me think of, and I'm not trying to be sanctimonious about this or act like idolatry isn't something that I don't have to fight with, right? There's certain movies that I cannot stand, and there's certain movies that I love, okay? Like, I love action movies. Those are fun. Those are so cool, like, to go. I mean, I remember back when Lord of the Rings was in theaters. I'm just, it's so cool. Like, I remember as a teenager walking out of the theater when the first trilogy was in theaters, and, like, you watch all the computer graphics, and then, like, you walk outside, and it's crisp fall air, and you're looking at the leaves, and you're like, man, these graphics are beautiful. And you're looking at a tree outside, but you just spent the last 3 hours of your life inside a theater thinking, man, those graphics are beautiful, and everything, pretty much everything that you're looking at is like CGI, the really intense like cultural art that's on these buildings. It's all CGI, and so you're spending this like 3-hour period just like enamored by how like beautiful the effects are in that movie, and you just feel dopey walking outside, and you're like, wow, that's a tree, you know. But that's what I'm talking about. Like we spend so much, putting so much effort into. I'll give an example. I used to be really into the show 24. I'm not really that much of an advocate for that show, but at the time, right when I got out of college, I really, some guys on my floor got me into that show. It all revolves around this guy named Jack Bauer, right? Some of you have probably seen it. And the dude is like, there's terms that we would use to describe this dude, but we can't say it in church, right? We shouldn't really say it anywhere, but the guy's really hardcore, right? Like he's amazing, like he can kill anybody. It's not a good thing, but I mean, to protect the United States of America for national security interests, he'll like kill anybody just to keep America safe. It's awesome. And like, I'm just kidding. But it shouldn't be like that. But I'm just saying, like, he's got, it's like kind of like everything that you think of when you think of David, but like in modern times when you're not really supposed to be like that, because it's like the new covenant now. But anyway, everything like David, he's like in charge of the sheep, and he's got this like anointing to kill, and that's why like bear ends up dead and the lion ends up dead and stuff like that. So that's like who Jack Bauer is, but in like modern times. But that's kind of anachronistic for the Christian. But anyway, this character is like amazing, and he can like kill anybody. Anyway, every time that you watched an episode of 24, that was filmed months prior to you seeing that. Every episode, every movie, every action sequence that you've ever seen was filmed months, if not years. I remember when in high school when it dawned on me that some of the movies that I was seeing, that this really awesome scene, and I would see it was like a behind the scenes thing, and they showed the timestamp, and it was like over a year since the thing had been shot. I'm like, man, this is old footage. But it's this movie that I just saw last week, as it just came out last week. And the reason why is post-production takes that long sometimes, because we put so much effort into making people look hardcore. And it's so much not a representation of reality. And I'm not knocking the movie industry for that reason. I'm not saying we shouldn't watch movies, but I'm just saying if you're hammering nails into the idol to keep it propped up, don't kid yourself into thinking that you're not putting nails into the idol to keep it propped up, okay? So I'm not saying that you can't watch movies, but just keep in mind, like, we as Americans do lots of things to keep our idols propped up on the shelf, because nobody wants to watch Keith or Sutherland like running around without explosions going on behind him that aren't actually happening. It's just him like doing flips and stuff. Anyway, that was kind of a long way around. Let's go back to Habakkuk. If we can go to chapter 2 of Habakkuk. It says, "What profit is the idol when its maker has carved it, or an image, a teacher of falsehood? For its maker trusts in his own handiwork, when he fashions speechless idols." It says, "Woe to him who says to a piece of wood, 'Awake,' to a mute stone, 'Arise,' and that is your teacher? Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, and there is no breath at all inside it. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him." I kind of jumped ahead of where I wanted to be, because I feel like every time the subject of idolatry comes up, people feel like you're beating them over the head. Every time somebody brings up the concept of idolatry to me, I feel like it's like almost like condemnation for me, because there's so many things that you can make an idol out of. If you look at like Jeremiah and what it's talking about, it's saying you're taking these inanimate objects and you're making an idol out of it. There's nothing wrong with the inanimate object. There's nothing wrong with, necessarily wrong with the movie that you're going to see, okay? There's a whole lot of good story, feel-good things out of, like, back when I was watching 24 that I could point to and say, hey, this was a really cool, like, redeeming thing. He did this, self-sacrificially to save this group of people. That was amazing. You can always point legitimately at good qualities. I'm not talking about anything being intrinsically bad. I don't know if I've made that clear. I'm not talking about anything, when we talk about idols, being intrinsically bad. It only becomes bad when it achieves idol status in our lives, right?
Yeah.
So don't take it as condemnation. This is kind of more of a question of where your heart is than it is about some inanimate object or some movie or some TV show.
Yeah.
One thing that I got ahead of myself in talking about was every time that you start talking about idols, we as a society are arrogant and we think that we've, as a society, transcended idolatry. We feel like we like to go to the British Museum and we like to go to the Smithsonian and look at all the idols and chuckle and say, well, this is stupid. People bow down before a block of wood. This is really goofy. But one thing that I wanted to point out is in the Old Testament, there are different types of worship that are given. The most basic form that we're all familiar with was bowing down, laying prostrate on the ground, putting your face down on the ground before something. That's bowing down in worship. But one thing I wanted to point out is the Bible speaks about meditation as being part and parcel, if not synonymous with worship in times. Can we go to Psalm 145, verse 5? This will only be a few minutes longer. You just sit tight with me. Just get a few more verses. Okay, Psalm 145. On the glorious splendor of your majesty and on your wonderful works I will meditate. Men shall speak of the power of your awesome acts, and I will tell of your greatness. They shall eagerly utter the memory of your abundant goodness and will shout joyfully of your righteousness. Everything that these three verses describe, people would look at and describe as praise and worship, except maybe talking about meditation in the first verse. On the glorious splendor of your majesty and your wonderful works, I will meditate. The only reason for going here is to the writer of this psalm, right. Meditation fell in the same category as every other form of worship, right? It fell in the same category of just singing about how God was good, how amazing he was, right? And everything that he had done in their lives. If we can go to Job chapter 15. Then Eliphaz the Temanite, I have no idea how you say that, but this guy named Eliphaz says, should a wise man answer with windy knowledge and fill himself with the east wind? Should he argue with useless talk or with words which are not profitable? Indeed, you do away with reverence and hinder meditation before God. I'm not trying to delve into what Eliphaz was trying to say in this passage, and he says a whole lot more, because everybody in Job says like a whole chapter at a time. But all I wanted to point out was verse 4, that he's equating meditation as like reverential worship, right? He's putting those in the same category. Could we go to Psalm 27, verse 4? One thing that I've asked from the Lord, that I shall seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord and to meditate in his temple. The point that I was trying to make here is like you go to a restaurant to eat a meal, right? You go to a movie theater to watch a movie. You go to a temple. I'm not talking about 21st century, what just some random person on the street would go to a temple for. They would go to take pictures and post it to Facebook. But 1000 BC when this was written, right?
Right.
If you were going to a temple, you were going to worship, right?
Yeah.
That's the only reason you had for being there. So when he says and to meditate in his temple, he's equating meditation, what you're thinking about consistently, what you're mulling over. That's worship.
Yeah.
To the psalmist, okay? So having gone through those verses, can we all agree meditation is a form of worship? Can we move on from there? Okay. All right, let's go to Isaiah chapter 44. I hesitate sometimes to give examples about what idols can be, because I remember, walking through the museum and seeing everything that people made idols out of. Like, nothing was off limits. No physical object was off limits. to make an idol out of. We as a species, as a race, are very resourceful at making idols. Like, we worship and we will worship. And if you need to make an idol, anything is fair game to make an idol out of. You'll see that when you walk through a museum, of anthropology. We can make idols out of anything. And so if I'm offering an example, that's just an example for this lesson's sake. It's not, tied down to any one thing, or I'm not trying to like bash people over the head for any one concept or whatever. To me, well, let's read this passage real quick. Isaiah 44. It says, "Surely he cuts cedars for himself, and takes a cypress or an oak, and raises it for himself among the trees of the forest. He plants a fir, and the rain makes it grow. Then it becomes something for a man to burn. So he takes one of them and warms himself. He also makes a fire to bake bread. He also makes a god and worships it, and he makes a graven image and falls down before it. Half of it," he's talking about like a tree that he's felled, "half of it he burns in the fire. Over this half he eats meat as he roasts a roast and is satisfied. He also warms himself and says, 'Aha, I am warm. I have seen the fire.' But the rest of it he makes into a god, his graven image. He falls down before it and worships. He also prays to it and says, 'Deliver me, for you are my God.' They do not know, nor do they understand, for he has smeared over their eyes so that they cannot see, and their hearts so that they cannot comprehend. No one recalls, nor is there any knowledge or understanding to say, 'I've burned half of it in the fire, and I've also baked bread over its coals. I roast meat and eat it. Then I make the rest of it into an abomination. I fall down before a block of wood.' He feeds on ashes, a deceived heart has turned him aside, and he cannot deliver himself, nor say, 'Isn't there a lie in my right hand?'" To me, this passage, it's so applicable to everything that we as Americans want to make idols out of. But to me, what this speaks to is the concept of a paycheck. I see tons of stuff on Facebook, like memes, where people are joking about what it's like on Thursday night, before the Friday you get paid. And people post memes. I've seen one where like the person's eating like Friday night of payday, and then they got this picture of like shrimp scampi. And then it's like Thursday night before payday, and it's like this person's like cooking ice over a skillet. And it's making fun of how Americans like live. We think, and I'm just saying, like, we have, when we get a paycheck, we think, this goes to the bills, this pays the electric, this pays utilities, this may be tax season, we'll pay taxes. And then this other subset of it is discretionary spending, stuff that I can go out to eat on, right? And so, as Americans, a lot of times I feel like we take that section and we don't physically do anything, but we mentally put it on a pedestal, where that's where our happiness comes from. That's where our joy comes from, is payday. I have coworkers that have payday annotated on their calendar. Again, they've shared their calendar with me so I can see all their appointments, but I also see when payday is. It's the same for me. It's the same for everybody. But they need that on there. It's like motivation. It's like, that's payday. Okay, that's fine. It's not bad to annotate payday. I'm just saying I'm sorry if this is sounding like I'm beating you guys over the head. I'm just saying anything is fair game. Anything you want to make an idol, you can make out of it, right? Yeah. So we take this part of the paycheck and we pay the bills with it. And we take this part and we mentally turn that into, this is what I'm living for now. This is going to be so awesome when I get paid, because I'm going to have the most amazing weekend and, just live it up. And then that's why I'm going to be, according to the meme, eating like ice right before, instead of like saving it or being like, hey, it all comes out of the same paycheck. Let's just, put some in savings and maybe eat ice on payday. And then that way we can like eat normally like for the rest of the week or whatever. Sorry if that sounds like beating anybody over the head. I don't mean it to be. But I think there's something to be said for how this verse is applicable to it, because the question that I think needs to be asked is the part, so when he takes that log that he's felled, right, it's a tree, he fells it, this part goes into the fire to heat up dinner. This part gets turned into an idol. It's the part that gets turned into an idol. Can that, provide him shelter? The answer is yes, if it's used as a support in his house, right? If it's used as a stud or used in a rafter, it can provide him support, right? Or shelter. If it's used along with the other to heat up his meal, the next time it can be a source of providing a good meal to him. But in its capacity as idol, it's worthless. So the problem with when we take the resource and mistake it for the source is that we take the resource and we put it on a pedestal, and in its capacity as source or pseudo-source, it can't do anything for us. So I'm not trying to beat anybody over the head, but as long as, that discretionary segment of your paycheck is what you live for, it's never going to be enough.
Yeah.
Okay? There's only one who's enough, all right?
Yeah.
So I'm sorry for that being kind of beating everybody over the head. Can we go to John 4:23? But an hour is coming, Jesus is talking, he says, an hour is coming, and now is when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For such people, the Father seeks to be his worshipers. We've reached a point where if we're going to worship the Father, I believe in physical acts of worship. I believe in raising your hands. I believe in, bowing before the Lord. But that in itself isn't what makes worship, right? And if we think that that's not what makes worship relative to the Father, then why do we have this attitude that idols can only be worshipped through, bowing before them physically or something? Jesus is saying, okay, here's how it is now. If you're going to worship God, you have to worship him from the heart. You have to worship him in spirit and truth. If it's possible to worship the Father in spirit and truth, it's also possible to worship something other than the Father internally.
Yeah.
And this is like one of the greatest deceptions of our generation, is thinking that like we've transcended idolatry, that we've conquered stupid idols, and we don't bow before idols anymore, and we're just as idolatrous as any other generation that's ever lived.
Yeah.
Because, like I was saying, if I've got something that I can't stop thinking about, and that takes up my concentration to the point where I'm not even really dwelling on Jesus, and I'm not even focused on who Jesus is, and that he's looking out for me, and that he's my everything. If I'm so fixated, whether it's on a person or whether it's on my job, this is something that I've dealt with. I'm so grateful to God for my job, but I feel like I'm doing better than I was, but like I don't want that to be an idol, even though it could be, right? I don't want my career, working for the Navy or whatever, to become this, like, that's what I live for. I'm not trying to knock any of my coworkers. I go to work every day with people that's their life. That's what they live for. They eat, live, breathe, and drink this stuff, like the technical matter, like, of what we're doing. And like, I can't afford to do that and still do it at the same time what God, wants me to do. It's not that I need to be like slacking off at work or not doing my job, but I can't let that become who I am and define me as a worshiper. I'm a worshiper whether or not I want to be. It's in my DNA. You're a worshiper whether or not you want to be. It's in your DNA. You will worship something, or you will worship someone, okay?
Yeah.
Let's go to 1 John chapter 5. It says, little children, guard yourselves from idols. It's the shortest verse we've gone to so far. It's obviously the last verse in the whole book of 1 John. And that's how he ends it. It doesn't say, love you bunches, John. He just says, little children, guard yourselves from idols. So it's kind of ominous. But I don't think he's just talking about the idols of that day. I think he's talking about all idols. Anything that would detract from the knowledge of God. Anything that would detract from knowing him and worshiping him. I had one last scripture that I was going to share with everybody. I always feel like whenever we're on this subject that it's like beating people over the head. If we can go to 2 Kings chapter 5. Let me give the backstory of what's going on. Naaman is a foreign general who was sick with leprosy. And he goes to Elisha the prophet and says, hey, can you do something to make me clean? And Elisha doesn't even see him. He sends out a messenger, says, go wash in the Jordan, right? And come back. And then Naaman takes offense at it and says, hey, I'm not going to do that. I've got cleaner rivers than back home. And his servants talked to him and said, hey, if he asked you to do something really easy, you would have just done it. So let's just go do it. Or if he'd asked you to do something really difficult, you would have go climb that mountain. You would have done it. So let's go. This is really easy. So Naaman and his entourage go over to Jordan. He dips in it. As the prophet said, he comes out clean, and he's so grateful. And he goes back to Elisha and he says, let's read here. He says, when you've returned to the man of God with all his company, and came and stood before him, he said, behold, now I know that there is no God in all the earth, but in Israel. So please take a present from your servant now. Naaman's offering Elisha a gift, like a physical gift. But Elisha says, as the Lord lives before whom I stand, I will take nothing. And Naaman, urged him, Elisha, to take it, but he refused. Naaman said, okay, if not, please let your servant at least be given 2 mules load of earth. For your servant will no longer offer burnt offerings nor release sacrifice to other gods, but to the Lord. So I love this verse. This is Naaman saying, hey, I just got healed by the one God who actually answers prayer. I've been bowing down my whole life to other gods and they haven't done anything for me. And now I bowed down to your God and did what his prophet told me to do. And now I'm healed and I want to serve him only. And so now he loads up, a pickup truck worth of dirt, right? And he's going to drive it over back home so he can dump it out, spread it out, and say, okay, I'm on Israeli ground serving the Israelites' God. And I'm going to worship him alone. Yeah. And then it's so awesome to me. And he says, in this matter, may the Lord pardon your servant. When my master goes into the house of Rimmon to worship there, and he leans on my hand and I bow myself in the house of Rimmon. When I bow myself in the house of Rimmon, the Lord pardon your servant in this matter. And Elisha said to him, go in peace. So he departed from him some distance. There's a hyper spiritual wing of Christianity that kind of, I feel like, wants to beat people over the head with stuff. This is to me, this is like the heart of God, right? Naaman's saying, hey, my boss still worships this piece of rock, right? Yeah. He bows before him every day, and he's my boss, and I kind of have to. It's my job. I got to go with him and bow with him. It's a rock. I know it's a rock. It's like the rock never healed me. Your God healed me, right? But is it okay if I just kind of go with my boss along just to help my boss out? And so Elisha's like, sure, go your way. To me, that's amazing. And it's so liberating because I feel like I have to go to work every single day with people that the subject matter that we work on, it's like their life. That's their God. I'm not trying to knock anybody, but there's people that I work with that I have to respect. And I do respect them. They're awesome. But everything that we're doing, that's their house of worship. This is what they live for, right? And knowing that God isn't so unfair and demanding that he hasn't, I don't know how to say this, but he doesn't require me to just cast aside all those relationships and everything that he's called me to do. He has called me to work where I'm called to work, right? But it's on a level that I can still like worship him and him alone.
Yeah.
And so to me this is, I'm sorry if I'm not making sense. To me that verse is liberating, right? All right, that's kind of pretty much all I had for tonight. I'm sorry for rambling. I love you guys. I didn't mean to make anybody feel like I was like beating you guys over the head about idolatry, because I feel like it's something that everybody in our culture either engages in or you deal with because you don't want to engage in that, right?
Right.
I know we have some prayer requests and we want to pray for those. When I was in school, we had some classes that had like a separate lab, and then we had other ones that on certain days we had like a lab. We had a lecture and we had a lab like rolled into the same session. And so to me, there's not a whole lot of opportunity sometimes with a sermon to have like a lab section with it, but to me, like, the number one way for me to not worship an idol is to make sure that I'm worshiping the one that I'm supposed to be worshiping instead, okay? So we have like another 5 minutes before 8 o'clock. Do you guys mind if we sing a song real quick? I'm sorry, I don't want to take your time. It will be like 5 minutes and then you can go and you'll live. So, let's go.